story number 9 on our countdown, the unredacted documents. On Sunday, Trump's judge in the classified documents case, Eileen Cannon, released more unredacted court filings. Of course, to Jack Smith's horror, Cannon has made this case very transparent for the American people. We've seen deep coordination between the White House, the Department of Justice, and the National Archives in the process of indicting Trump. And the latest unsealed document dump from Cannon reveals that not every box at Mar-a-Lago was actually even brought there by President Trump. The General Services Administration handles the transition period. They had about 2,000 pounds of unchecked documents. And then months after Trump left office, they said, okay, hey, you got to take these boxes. Now, those boxes were mixed in with the boxes that Trump brought in, meaning there is no way to know if the classified documents came from the transition team or were brought to Mar-a-Lago by Trump himself. When will prosecutor Jack Smith learn that facts actually matter, the details matter? In the left's desperate attempt to stop Trump from winning the White House again, Smith has now charged Trump with espionage, which means willful retention of the documents. And here's the whole thing. I mean, you can't willfully retain documents you didn't know were sent to you. Joining us now to discuss, Rachel Kugel. She's a trial and defense attorney. She also is with us. Doug Burns, former federal prosecutor. Thank you both so much for joining us. Rachel, what do you make of this? You know, you had the transition team. I mean, and then, how can you charge him with espionage and you can't even prove that Trump actually brought in those documents to Mar-a-Lago? Maybe they got mixed in.
It's absolutely unbelievable. And honestly, I mean, did any of us think that Donald Trump was carrying a box anywhere himself? I mean, let's be real. I mean, that was never happening. But I think it goes to so much more. First of all, thank God that we finally have a judge that can see some level of legal reality and make some rulings that make some actual legal sense, like unredacting these documents, so that the American people can see what they're really dealing with here. And I think this goes not just to the proofs on espionage, for example, which, as you pointed out so eloquently, is obviously impacted by this, but also selective prosecution, because these documents also show that there were many meetings happening, even long before the original alleged criminal referral was made. And that really flies in the face of even what President Biden said he knew and when he knew it.
And Doug, another revelation from the White House visitor logs. Gary Stern is the chief general counsel for the National Archives, and beginning just days after Trump left the White House, guess what? He had a meeting with Joe Biden's deputy White House counsel, Jonathan Sue, and over the course of the next 2 years, Gary Stern would meet with the White House nearly 20 more times. I mean, look at this. I mean, there's so many indications, Doug, that there was a blatant coordination with the White House, with these political prosecutions of President Trump. How can they deny? How can Joe Biden deny that he hasn't had a hand in all of this?
Well, with the cover of mainstream media, the cover of liberal media, 50% of the country will never hear about it. It's outrageous and disgraceful. Remember, in the classified documents case, one very important factoid, law enforcement propped up evidence to make it look like that's the way they found it. I've never really seen that in all of my years. What a disgrace. You remember, like, stuff supposedly carelessly left when it was staged by law enforcement. That's incredible. But to the point you just made, no question whatsoever that there were coordinated efforts. It takes a judge who's fair, fortunately, to start exposing this. And then you have to make the corollary point. Look what's going on in New York City. You have a judge who's completely and totally unfair. So in a hypothetical analogy, he would never do what Judge Cannon is doing.
And Rachel, as they're going all out on President Trump, our current president, who illegally possessed classified information, stole some of it from a secure setting, kept information that is top secret and relevant to his presidency, according to Congressman Michael Waltz, and was caught on tape sharing classified information. Of course, they said that they couldn't prosecute him, Joe Biden, of course, we're talking about, because he's an elderly man with a poor memory. So are they going after President Trump because he's not an elderly man and he has a great memory? I mean, it's ridiculous. How can that be a defense not to charge someone?
It's ridiculous. And again, it goes to that argument about selective prosecution. These documents that came out, they show that Biden had these documents that he had for decades. Okay, like they think dating back to the 70s, he possessed documents that he shouldn't have had. And remember, his case is even worse because he was the vice president, right? So there's no vice presidential immunity for having documents. So, I mean, realistically, this goes to selective prosecution. This goes to the question of why he wasn't charged. And it actually even discusses in some of the documents that were unredacted, he and his people and his team's concerns, on Biden, I mean, that he would be potentially indicted if they went after this with Trump. So they knew this was going to be an issue, or that he would, that the GOP would bring it up in Congress and look into his documents. So they actually started making efforts to look for stuff at his house. That's how coordinated this was. And that's how upset we should all be as we watch this, because don't kid yourself. If they can do this to the guy running for president, imagine what they can do to you.
Doug, we have less than a minute left. President Trump, he's under this gag order. Real quick, I thought gag orders were not mostly for witnesses, for the prosecution, if anything. I've never heard of a defendant actually being slapped down with a gag order. Don't they want the defendant to speak up for himself, to use his words against him? So how unusual and rare is this to even have a gag order on a defendant?
Gag orders are to protect a defendant, okay, to make sure that prosecutors and law enforcement don't make statements that'll be prejudicial to the defendant. So welcome to Trump prosecution world. Let's just flip everything on its head, completely backwards, and then we're going to gag the defendant while allowing Michael Cohen to A, say whatever he wants, and B, monetize it on TikTok. It's just a total disgrace.
We have to leave it right there. Our legal experts, thank you guys so much for joining us.
My pleasure.